Hello everybody, and how are you? I hope that you're surviving at the moment. I'm going to guess that because you're here that you're at least kind of still conscious, but whatever. So welcome, I'm Jev. I live in New Zealand, commonly known as NZ, because the way we say our Zs. And I read old-fashioned children's books for you here on Twitch and over on YouTube. So if you want to be notified when I go live, then follow me here on Twitch. That's hitting the heart button. You need to log in to be able to do that, and then Twitch will notify you whenever I go live. Or if you're on YouTube, then hit the subscribe button and you'll be notified when I'm live. So you'll be able to listen to the next news story or set of chapters, whatever you want to call it. I do rough reads. They're not fancy. I interrupt myself. I get things wrong. I restart sentences. I get interruptions that happen. They're not like professionally recorded audiobooks with nothing out of place. It's more like having a bedtime story where somebody comes into the room and starts talking to whoever's reading, and so there's an interruption, or somebody doesn't understand something, so the reader will explain it. There you go. That's the easiest way to explain what I do. They're old-fashioned stories. They're children's books, yes, but they are books that are written from generations past. Often they're books that I've grown up with listening to or reading myself, my parents have, or even my grandparents have. Most of the time these days I read using a first generation iPad mini. That's this wonderful device here, which I'm going to have to wake up because it's gone to sleep again, obviously. Just because I download my books from Project Gutenberg, which is where they are if they are public domain books. Or I read an actual physical paper pages type book, and I do have quite a few of those, but most of those are in boxes still at the moment while I'm still sorting out my office space, which is behind me, behind my green screen, which is why you have a lovely picture of somebody else's library. And eventually I will unearth those and start reading from physical books where you'll hear me turning the pages as I'm reading to you. So I think that's enough. Oh, not quite enough. Get yourself something to drink, some water, preferably, because you need to keep yourself hydrated. Otherwise, whatever it is that you need, maybe even something to snack on and somewhere comfortable to sit or lie so that you can listen. So we'll carry on. I am reading New Treasure Seekers by Edith Nesbit. It is the last book of her trilogy of the Bastable children, and we are 2/3 of the way through. We are going to be reading chapters 9 and 10 today. I think it's 9 and 10. I'm starting with chapter 9 of New Treasure Seekers by E. Nesbit, called The Flying Lodger. So here we go. Get comfortable. The Flying Lodger. Father knows a man called Eustace Sandal. I do not know how to express his inside soul, but I have heard Father say he means well. He is a vegetarian and a primitive social something and an all-wooler and things like that. So obviously this is a type of personal and political stance that was around at the time that the children didn't necessarily have a lot of respect for. We'll carry on and find out what it actually means, because most of the time our old-fashioned authors do actually explain things along the way. Not always. Sometimes they'll be writing about something that is so common to them that they don't explain it. And, sorry, itchy eyelid. And so because it's so common to them, they don't explain it. And if it's something that I understand, that I think that most other people who are listening may not understand, I don't assume that you don't, but just I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, then I will actually, what will I do? I'll actually explain it for you. That's what I'm going to do. Sorry, I've also got ADHD, and it means that sometimes I lose track partway through a sentence, or lose where I'm up to on a page. So I shall carry on reading. He's a vegetarian and a primitive social something and an all-wooler and things like that, and he is really as good as he can stick, only most awfully dull. I believe he eats bread and milk from choice, Well, he has great, magnificent dreams about all the things you can do for other people, and he wants to distill cultivatedness into the sort of people who live in model workmen's dwellings and teach them to live up to better things. This is what he says. So he gives concerts in Camberwell and places like that, and curates come from far and near to sing about bold bandoleros and the song of the bow, and people who have escaped being curates give comic recitings, and he is sure that it does everyone good and gives them glimpses of the life beautiful. And I had to put air quotes around it because it's written with quotation marks around it. He said that. Oswald heard him with his own trustworthy ears. Anyway, the people enjoy the concerts no end, and that's the great thing. In case you hadn't guessed it, our narrator is Oswald, and he often talks about himself in third person, and you can usually tell when he's really thinking about what he's writing because he will use big words that he doesn't necessarily understand and often gets wrong. Or he will talk about how good Oswald is in third person. Because he really is trying to be good. One of our books was The Would-Be Goods. That's one of the others in the series. Well, he came one night with a lot of tickets he wanted to sell, and Father bought some for the servants. And Dora happened to go in to get the gum for a kite we were making, gum being what was used for pasting paper. Gum. Anyway, we'll carry on. And Mr. Sandal said, "Well, my little maiden, would you not like to come on Thursday evening and share in the task of raising our poor brothers and sisters to the higher levels of culture?" Oh dear, he's someone who tries to improve people. So, of course, Dora said she would, very much. Dora's the oldest sister, and she tends to be extra well behaved and do all the things that you're meant to do, supposedly. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see. Sorry, I'm just changing something here, one of the settings. Carrying on. So, of course, Dora said she would very much. Then he explained about the concert, calling her my little one and dear child, which Alice never would have borne, but Dora is not only of a sensitive nature and hardly minds what she is called, so long as it is not names, which she does not deem dear child, etc. to be, though Oswald would. Dora was quite excited about it, and the strangers so worked upon her feelings that she accepted the deep responsibility of selling tickets, and for a week there was no bearing her. I believe she did sell 9 to people in Lewisham and New Cross who knew no better, and Father bought tickets for all of us, and when the eventful evening dawned we went to Camberwell by train and tram via Miss Blake. That means we shouldn't have been allowed to go without her. The tram ride was rather jolly, but when we got out and walked we felt like Alone in London or Jessica's First Prayer, which I think are either books or poems that these children would have grown up with, because Camberwell is a devastating region that makes you think of rickety attics with the wind whistling through them, or miserable cellars where forsaken children do wonders by pawning their relations' clothes and looking after the baby. It was a dampish night, those sort of books, done probably by the Religious Tract Society or something like that, books that were supposedly going to appeal to children but would actually help them to behave themselves better, because life for other people is worse than what we have it, etc., etc. It was very much a thing that Victorians and Edwardians did. So we shall carry on. It was a dampish night and we walked on greasy mud, and as we walked along Alice kicked against something on the pavement. It chinked, and when she picked it up it was 5 bob rolled up in newspaper. "I expect it's somebody's little all," said Alice, and the cup was dashed from their lips just when they were going to joyfully spend it. We ought to give it to the police. But Miss Blake said no, and that we were late already, and so we went on, and Alice held the packet in her muff throughout the concert which ensued. I will not tell you anything about the concert, except that it was quite fairly jolly. You must have been to these self-raising concerts in the course of your young lives. When it was over, we reasoned with Miss Blake, and she let us go through the light blue paper door beside the stage and find Mr. Sandal. We thought he might happen to hear who had lost the 5 bob and return it to its sorrowing family. He was in a great hurry, but he took the chink and said he'd let us know if anything happened. Sorry, I have a itchy nose. I'm not sure why. Right. Then we went home very cheerful, singing bits of the comic songs a bishop's son had done in the concert, and little thinking what we were taking home with us. It was only a few days after this, or perhaps a week, that we all began to be rather cross. Alice, usually as near a brick as a girl can go, was the worst of the lot, and if you said what you thought of her, she instantly began to snivel. And we all had awful colds, and our handkerchiefs gave out, and then our heads ached. Oswald's head was particularly hot, I remember, and he wanted to rest it on the backs of chairs or on tables, or anything steady. But why prolong the painful narrative? What we had brought home from Camberwell was the measles. And as soon as the grown-ups recognised the grim intruder for the fell disease that it is, we all went to bed, and there was an end of active adventure for some time. Of course, when you begin to get better, there are grapes and other luxuries not of everyday occurrences, but when you're sniffling and fevering in bed and red as a lobster and blazing hot, you are inclined to think it is a heavy price to pay for any concert, however raising. Mr. Sandal came to see father the very day we all marched bedward. He had found the owner of the 5 shillings. It was a doctor's fee about to be paid by the parent of a thoroughly measly family. And if we had taken it to the police at once, Alice would not have held it in her hand all through the concert. But I will not blame Blakey. She was a jolly good nurse and read aloud to us with unfatigable industry while we were getting better. Our having fallen victims to this disgusting complaint ended in our being sent to the seaside. Father could not take us himself, so we went to stay with a sister of Mr. Sandal's. She was like him, only more so in every way. The journey was very joyous. Father saw us off at Cannon Street, and we had a carriage to ourselves all the way, and we passed the station where Oswald would not like to be a porter. Rude boys at this station put their heads out of the window and shout, "Who's a duffer?" and things like that, and the porters have to shout, "I am," because Higham is the name of the station, and porters have seldom any H's with which to protect themselves from this cruel joke. It was a glorious moment when the train swooped out of a tunnel and we looked over the downs and saw the grey-blue line that was the sea. We had not seen the sea since before Mother died. I believe we older ones all thought of that, and it made us quieter than the younger ones were. I do not want to forget anything, but it makes you feel quite empty and stupid when you remember some things. There was a good drive in a wagonette after we got to the station. There were primroses under some of the hedges and lots of dog violets, and at last we got to Miss Sandal's house. It is before you come to the village, and it is a little square white house. There is a big old windmill at the back of it. It is not used any more for grinding corn, but fishermen keep their nets in it. Corn being wheat, corn being the European name for whatever is the most common grain that we grind. That used to confuse me so much until somebody explained it. Miss Sandal came out of the green gate to meet us. She had a soft drab dress and a long thin neck, and her hair was drab too, and it was screwed up tight. That means pulled so tightly back, and then probably put into a little bun on the back of her head that was very, very, very tight. Screwed up tight. She said, "Welcome, one and all," in a kind voice, but it was too much like Mr. Sandal's for me, and we went in. She showed us the sitting rooms and the rooms where we were to sleep, and then she left us to wash our hands and faces. When we were alone, we burst open the doors of our rooms with one consent, and met on the landing with a rush like the great rivers of America. "Well," said Oswald, and the others said the same. "Of all the rummy cribs," remarked Dicky. "It's like a workhouse or a hospital," said Dora. "I think I like it." Dora's a little different to the rest of the children, obviously. It makes me think of bald-headed gentlemen, said H.O. It's so bare. It was. All the walls were white plaster. The furniture was white deal, what there was of it, which was precious little. There were no carpets, only white matting, and there was not a single ornament in a single room. There was a clock on the dining room mantelpiece, but that could not be counted as an ornament because of the useful side of its character. There were only about 6 pictures, all of a brownish colour. One was the blind girl sitting on an orange with a broken fiddle. It is called Hope. So apparently that's a famous picture. You can look that one up. When we were clean, Miss Sandal gave us tea. As we sat down, she said, the motto of our little household is plain living and high thinking. And some of us feared for an instant that this might mean not enough to eat. But fortunately, this was not the case. There was plenty, but all of a milky, bunny, as in like buns, fruity vegetable sort. We soon got used to it and liked it all right. Miss Sandal was very kind. She offered to read aloud to us after tea, and exchanging glances of despair, some of us said we should like it very much, being polite, obviously. It was Oswald who found the manly courage to say very politely, would it be all the same to you if we went and looked at the sea first, because... And she said, not at all, adding something about nature, the dear old nurse, taking somebody on her knee, and let us go. We asked her which way, and we tore up the road and through the village and onto the sea wall, and then with 6 joyous bounds we leapt down onto the sand. The author will not bother you with a description of the mighty billows of ocean, which you must have read about, if not seen, but he will just say what perhaps you are not aware of, that seagulls eat clams and mussels and cockles and crack the shells with their beaks. The author has seen this done. You also know, I suppose, that you can dig in the sand, if you have a spade, and make sandcastles and stay in them till the tide washes you out. I will say no more except that when we gazed upon the sea and the sand, we felt we did not care twopence how highly Miss Sandal might think of us, or how plainly she might make us live, so long as we had got the briny deep to go down to. It was too early in the year and too late in the day to bathe, but we paddled, which comes to much the same thing, and you almost always have to change everything afterwards. Yeah, because you get splashed and salty and sand everywhere. I was going to say before that I think this is spring because they talked about primroses that they saw on their way. Sorry, itchy nose again. And I'm just going to move my chair because it's just sliding backwards a little more than I want. And we shall see about carrying on. Right. When it got dark, we had to go back to the White House, and there was supper. And then we found that Miss Sandal did not keep a servant, so of course we offered to help wash up. H.O. only broke 2 plates. Nothing worth telling about happened till we had been there over a week, and had got to know the coast guards and a lot of the village people. Quite well. I do like coast guards. They seem to know everything you want to hear about. Miss Sandal used to read to us out of poetry books, and about a chap called Thoreau, who could tickle fish, and they liked it, and let him. She was kind, but rather like her house. There was something bare and bald about her inside mind, I believe. She was very, very calm, and said that people who lost their tempers were not living the higher life. But one day a telegram came, and then she was not calm at all. She got quite like other people and quite shoved H.O. for getting in her way when she was looking for her purse to pay for the answer to the telegram. We'll see what's happening. Then she said to Dora, and she was pale and her eyes red, just like people who live the lower or ordinary life, "My dears, it's dreadful. My poor brother, he's had a fall. I must go to him at once." And she sent Oswald to order the Fly from the Old Ship Hotel. The Fly is a type of carriage. and the girls to see if Mrs. Beale would come and take care of us while she was away. Then she kissed us all and went off very unhappy. We heard afterwards that poor worthy Mr. Sandal had climbed a scaffolding to give a workman a tract about drink, and he didn't know the proper part of the scaffolding to stand on. The workman did, of course, so he fetched down 6 planks, and the workman, and if a dust cart hadn't happened to be passing just under so that they fell into it, their lives would not have been spared. So he fell through the scaffolding and took 6 planks on the way. As it was, Mr. Sandal broke his arm and his head. The workman escaped unscathed but furious. The workman was a teetotaler. Didn't need to be given a tract. Mrs. Beale came, and the first thing she did was buy a leg of mutton and cook it. It was the first meat we had had since arriving at Lymchurch. Or Limechurch, I'm not quite sure which. Here we go. He fetched down 6 planks and the workman. Let's see if you can see it. Oops, there. There's someone down below watching, and there's the 2 men, the workman and Mr. whatever his name is. You remember. I expect she can't afford good butcher's meat, said Mrs. Beale, but your pa, I expect he pays for you, and I bet he'd like you to have your fill of something as'll lay across your chesties. So she made a Yorkshire pudding as well. It was good. After dinner we sat on the sea wall, feeling more like after dinner than we had felt for days, and Dora said, "Poor Miss Sandal, I never thought about her being hard up somehow. I wish we could do something to help her." Oh dear, here we go again. These children, they try to do something good and helpful, but their perception of that and what is really helpful are 2 different things. Let's read on and find out just what's about to happen. Disaster? Hopefully not. We'll see. It's not the end of the book, so it could well be disaster. There seems to be one every chapter. We might go out street singing, Noel said, but that was no good because there is only one street in the village and the people there are much too poor for one to be able to ask them for anything, and all round it is fields with only sheep who have nothing to give except their wool, and when it comes to taking that, they are never asked. Dora thought we might get father to give her money, but Oswald knew this would never do. Then suddenly a thought struck someone. I will not say who, and that someone said she ought to let lodgings, like all the other people do in Lymchurch, or Limechurch. That was the beginning of it. The end, for that day, was our getting the top of a cardboard box and printing on it the following lines in as many different coloured chalks as we happened to have with us. Lodgings to let, inquire, inside. We ruled spaces for the letters to go in and did it very neatly. When we went to bed, we stuck it in our bedroom window with stamp paper. That's the bit round the edges of stamps, because stamps used to be printed in one big whole sheet with a type of dried gum on the back that you then lick after you'd torn the stamp out of the sheet. You licked it and then put it on the page, which I grew up with doing that. You don't know now. They come self-adhesive, and most of the time we don't need stamps because we use email. Anyway, stamp paper is the edges that the stamps are torn out from. So effectively it works a little bit like sellotape, except it's not self-sticky. You have to wet it. In the morning, when Oswald drew up his blind, there was quite a crowd of kids looking in at the card. Mrs. Beale came out and shooed them away as if they were hens, and we did not have to explain the card to her at all. She never said anything about it. I never knew such a woman as Mrs. Beale for minding her own business. She said afterwards she supposed Miss Sandal had told us to put up the card. Well, 2 or 3 days went by and nothing happened, only we had a letter from Miss Sandal telling us how the poor sufferer was groaning, and one from father telling us to be good children and not get into scrapes, and people who drove by used to look at the card and laugh. Then one day a carriage came driving up with a gentleman in it, and he saw the rainbow beauty of our chalked card, and he got out and came up the path. He had a pale face and white hair with very bright eyes that moved about quickly like a bird's, and he was dressed in a quite new tweed suit that did not fit him very well. Dora and Alice answered the door before anyone had time to knock, and the author has reason to believe their hearts were beating wildly. "How much?" said the gentleman shortly. Alice and Dora were so surprised by his suddenness that they could only reply, just so," said the gentleman briskly as Oswald stepped modestly forward and said, "Won't you come inside?" "The very thing," said he, and he came in. We showed him into the dining room and asked him to excuse us a minute, then held a breathless council outside the door. "It depends on how many rooms he wants," said Dora. "Let's say so much a room," said Dicky, "and extra if he wants Mrs. Beale to wait on him." So we decided to do this. We thought £1 a room seemed fair, and we went back. "How many rooms do you want?" Oswald said. "All the room there is," said the gentleman. "They're £1 each," said Oswald, "and extra for Mrs. Beale." "How much together?" Oswald thought for a minute and then said, 9 rooms is £9 and £2 a week for Mrs. Beale because she is a widow." "Done," said the gentleman. "I'll go and fetch my portmanteaus." Now here he is at the door talking to the two girls. Not so sure about this chap, especially if his eyes are darting around all over the place. He bounced up and out and got into his carriage and drove away. It was not till he was finally gone quite beyond recall that Alice suddenly said, "But if he has all the rooms, where are we to sleep?" "He must be awfully rich," said H.O., "wanting all those rooms." "Well, he can't sleep in more than one at once," said Dicky, "however rich he is." "We might wait till he was bedded down and then sleep in the rooms he didn't want." But Oswald was firm. He knew that if the man paid for the rooms he must have them to himself. "He won't sleep in the kitchen," said Dora. "Couldn't we sleep there?" But we all said we couldn't and wouldn't. Then Alice suddenly said, "I know, the mill. There are heaps and heaps of fishing nets there. We could each take a blanket like Indians and creep over under cover of night after the Beale has gone and get back before she comes in the morning." It seemed a sporting thing to do, and we agreed, only Dora said she thought it would be draughty. Of course, we went over to the mill at once to lay our plans and prepare for the silent watches of the night. There are 3 stories to a windmill besides the ground floor. The first floor is pretty empty, the next is nearly full of millstones and machinery, and the one above is where the corn runs down from onto the millstones. The first floor is the one where they usually have the flour coming out from the millstones, the floor above, and then down through a big chute and gets put into the sacks and then closed up. So that's the floor where the sacks of flour are stored until they get sent off for delivery. We settled to let the girls have the first floor, which was covered in heaps of nets, and we would pig in with the millstones on the floor above. We had just secretly got out the last of the 6 blankets from the house and got it into the mill, disguised in a clothes basket, when we heard wheels, and there was the gentleman back again. He had only got 1 portmanteau after all, and that was a very little one. Mrs. Beale was bobbing at him in the doorway when we got up. Of course, we told her he had rented rooms, but we had not said how many, for fear she should ask where we were going to sleep, and we had a feeling that but few grown-ups would like our sleeping in a mill, however much we were living the higher life by sacrificing ourselves to get money for Miss Sandal. The gentleman ordered sheep's head and trotters for dinner, and when he found that he could not have that, he said, "Gammon and spinach," but there was not any spinach in the village, so he had to fall back on eggs and bacon. Gammon is is another form of pork that's cured that you eat, like you do ham and bacon in England. So ham and eggs, bacon and eggs instead. Mrs. Beale cooked it, and when he had fallen back on it, she washed up and went home, and we were left. We could hear the gentleman singing to himself something about wooding he had a bird that he might fly to thee. Then we got the lanterns that you take when you go up the street on a dark night, and we crept over to the mill. It was much darker than we expected. We decided to keep our clothes on, partly for warmness and partly in case of any sudden alarm or the fishermen wanting their nets in the middle of the night, which sometimes happens if the tide is favourable. We let the girls keep the lantern, and we went up with a bit of candle Dicky had saved and tried to get comfortable among the millstones and machinery, but it was not easy, and Oswald for once was not sorry when he heard the voice of Dora calling in trembling tones from the floor below. "Oswald, Dicky," said the voice, "I wish one of you would come down a sec." Oswald flew to the assistance of his distressed sister. "It's only that we're all a little bit uncomfortable," she whispered. "I didn't want to yell it out because of Noel and H.O. I don't want to frighten them. But I can't help feeling that if anything popped out of the dark at us, I should die. Can't you all come down here? The nets are quite comfortable, and I do wish you would." Alice said she was not frightened, but supposed there were rats, which are said to infest old buildings, especially mills. So we consented to come down, and told Noel and H.O. to come down because it was more comfy, and it is easier to settle yourself for the night among fishing nets than among machinery. There was a rustling now and then among the heaps of broken chairs and jack planes and baskets and spades and hoes and bits of spars of ships at the far end of our sleeping apartment, but Dicky and Oswald resolutely said it was the wind or else jackdaws making their nests, though of course they knew this was not done at night. Sleeping in a mill was not nearly the fun we had thought it would be, somehow. For one thing, it was horrid not having a pillow, and the fishing nets were so stiff you could not bunch them up properly to make one. And unless you have been born and bred a Red Indian, you do not know how to manage your blanket so as to make it keep out the draughts. And when we had put out the light, Oswald more than once felt as though earwigs and spiders were walking on his face in the dark. But when we struck a match, there was nothing there. And empty mills do creak and rustle and move about in a very odd way. Oswald was not afraid, but he did think we might as well have slept in the kitchen, because the gentleman could not have wanted to use that when he was asleep. You see, we thought then that he would sleep all night, like other people. We got to sleep at last, and in the night the girls edged up to their bold brothers so that when the morning sun shone in bars of dusty gold through the chinks of the aged edifice and woke us up, we were all lying in a snuggly heap like a litter of puppies. "Oh, I am so stiff," said Alice, stretching. "I've never slept in my clothes before. It makes me feel as if I've been starched and ironed like a boy's collar." We all felt pretty much the same, and our faces were tired too and stiff, which was rum, and the author cannot account for it unless it really was spiders that walked on us. I believe the ancient Greeks considered them to be venomous, and perhaps that's how their venom influences their victims. "I think mills are merely beastly," remarked H.O. when we had woken him up. "You can't wash yourself or brush your hair or anything." "You aren't always so jolly particular about your hair," said Dicky. "Don't be so disagreeable," said Dora, and Dicky rejoined, "Disagreeable yourself." There is certainly something about sleeping in your clothes that makes you feel not so kind and polite as usual. I expect this is why tramps are so fierce and knock people down in lonely roads and kick them. Oswald knows he felt just like kicking anyone if they happened to cheek him the least little bit, but by a fortunate accident, nobody did. The author believes there is a picture called Hopeless Dawn. We felt exactly like that. Nothing seemed the least bit of good. It was a pitiful band with hands and faces dirtier than anyone would believe who has not slept in a mill or witnessed others who had done so, that crossed the wet green grass between the mill and the White House. I shan't ever put morning dew into my poetry again," Noel said. "It's not nearly so poetical as people make out, and it is as cold as ice, right through your boots." We felt rather better when we had had a good splash in the brick-paved back kitchen that Miss Sandal calls the bathroom. And Alice made a fire and boiled a kettle, and we had some tea and eggs. Then we looked at the clock, and it was 5:30. So we hastened to get into another part of the house before Mrs. Beale came. I wish we'd tried to live the higher life some less beastly way, said Dicky as we went along the passage. Living the higher life always hurts at the beginning, Alice said. I expect it's like new boots, only when you've got used to it, you're glad you bore it at first. Let's listen at the doors till we find out where he isn't sleeping. So we listened at all the bedroom doors, but not a snore was heard. Not a snore was heard. Perhaps he was a burglar, said H.O., and only pretended to want lodgings so as to get in and bone all the valuables. There aren't any valuables, said Noel, and this was quite true, for Miss Sandal had no silver or jewellery except a brooch of pewter, which is a cheap metal, and the very teaspoons were of wood, very hard to keep clean, and having to be scraped. Perhaps he sleeps without snoring, said Oswald. Some people do. Not old gentlemen, said Noel. Think of our Indian uncle. H.O. used to think it was bears at first. Perhaps he rises with the lark, said Alice, and is wondering why Brecker isn't ready. So then we listened at the sitting-room doors, and through the keyhole of the parlour we heard a noise of someone moving, and then in a soft whistle the tune of Would I Were a Bird song. So then we went into the dining-room to sit down, but when we opened the door we almost fell in a heap on the matting, and no one had breath for a word, not even for crikey, which was what we all thought. I have read of people who could not believe their eyes, and I have always thought it such rot of them, but now as the author gazed on the scene he really could not be quite sure that he was not in a dream, and that the gentleman and the night in the mill weren't dreams too. Pull back the curtains, Alice said, and we did. I wish I could make the reader feel as astonished as we did. The last time we had seen the room the walls had been bare and white. Now they were covered with the most splendid drawings you can think of, all done in coloured chalk. I don't mean mixed up like we do with our chalks, but one picture was done in green, and another in brown, and another in red, and so on, and the chalk must have been of some fat, radiant kind, quite unknown to us, for some of the lines were over an inch thick. How perfectly lovely, said Alice. He must have sat up all night to do it. He is good. I expect he's trying to live the higher life too, just going about doing secretly and spending his time making other people's houses pretty. I wonder what he'd have done if the room had had a large pattern of brown roses on it, like Mrs. Beale's, said Noel. I say, look at that angel. Isn't it poetical? It makes me feel I must write something about it. It was a good angel. All drawn in grey, that was, with very wide wings going right across the room and a whole bundle of lilies in his arms. Then there were seagulls and ravens and butterflies and ballet girls with butterflies' wings and a man with artificial wings being fastened on, and you could see he was just going to jump off a rock. And there were fairies and bats and flying foxes and flying fish and one glorious winged horse done in red chalk, and his wings went from one side of the room to the other and crossed the angels. There were dozens and dozens of birds, all done in just a few lines, but exactly right. You couldn't make any mistake about what anything was meant for. And all the things, whatever they were, had wings on them. How Oswald wishes that those pictures had been done in his house. While we stood gazing, the door of the other room opened, and the gentleman stood before us more covered with different coloured chalks than I should have thought he could have got, even with all those drawings, and he had a thing made of wire and paper in his hand, and he said, "Wouldn't you like to fly?" "Yes," said everyone. "Well then," he said, "I've got a nice little flying machine here. I'll fit it on to one of you, and then you jump out of the attic window. You don't know what it's like to fly." We said we would rather not. "But I insist," said the gentleman. "I have your real interest at heart, my children. I can't allow you in your ignorance to reject the chance of a lifetime." We still said, "No, thank you," and we began to feel very uncomfy, for the gentleman's eyes were now rolling wildly. "Then I'll make you," he said, catching hold of Oswald. "You jolly well won't," cried Dicky, catching hold of the arm of the gentleman. Then Dora said very primly and speaking rather slowly, and she was very pale, "I think it would be lovely to fly. Will you just show me how the flying machine looks when it is unfolded? Oh, she's being brave. Hang on, I'll just show you this. Then I'll make you, he said, catching hold of Oswald. And there he is. Doesn't he look a little bit unbalanced? You can't quite see his face there, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get it so you can, but my camera doesn't autofocus. Sadly. Especially not on something that's not a real person's face. So Dora is very pale, but saying she would like to see what it looks like. The gentleman dropped Oswald, and Dora made go, go with her lips without speaking, while he began to unfold the flying machine. We others went. Oswald lingered last, and then in an instant Dora had nipped out of the room, banged the door, and locked it. Wow, brave Dora. To the mill, she cried, and we ran like mad and got in and barred the big door and went up to the first floor and looked out of the big window to warn off Mrs. Beale. And we thumped Dora on the back, and Dickie called her a Sherlock Holmes, and Noel said she was a heroine. It wasn't anything, Dora said just before she began to cry, only I remember reading that you must pretend to humour them and then get away, for of course I saw at once he was a lunatic. Oh, how awful it might have been. He could have made us all jump out of the attic window, and there would have been no one left to tell father. Oh, oh, and then the crying began. But we were proud of Dora, and I am sorry that we make fun of her sometimes, but it is difficult not to. We decided to signal the first person that passed, and we got Alice to take off her red flannel petticoat for a signal. The first people who came were two men in a dog cart. We waved the signalising petticoat, and they pulled up, and one got out and came up to the mill. We explained about the lunatic and the wanting us to jump out of the windows. "Right-o," cried the man to the one still in the cart. "Got him!" And the other hitched the horse to the gate and came over, and the other went to the house. "Come along down, young ladies and gentlemen," said the second man when he had been told. "He's as gentle as a lamb. He does not think it hurts to jump out of windows. He thinks it really is flying. He'll be like an angel when he sees the doctor." We asked if he had been mad before, because we had thought he might have suddenly gone so. "He certainly has," replied the man. "He has never been so to say himself since tumbling out of a flying machine he went up in with a friend. He was an artist previous to that, an excellent one, I believe, but now he only draws objects with wings, and now and then he wants to make people fly, perfect strangers sometimes, like yourselves. Yes, miss, I am his attendant, and his pictures often amuse me by the half hours together. Poor gentleman." "How did he get away?" Alice asked. "Well, miss, the poor gentleman's brother got hurt, and Mr. Sidney, that's him inside, seemed wonderfully put out, and hung over the body in a way pitiful to see. But really he was extracting the cash from the sufferer's pockets. Then, while all of us were occupied with Mr. Eustace, Mr. Sidney just packs his portmanteau and out he goes by the back door. When we missed him, we sent for Dr. Baker, but by the time he came it was too late to get here. Dr. Baker said at once he'd revert to his boyhood home, and the doctor has proved correct. We had come out of the mill, and with this polite person we went to the gate, and saw the lunatic get into the carriage, very gentle and gay. "But, doctor," said Oswald, "he did say he'd give £9 a week for the rooms. Oughtn't he to pay?" "You might have known he was mad to say that," said the doctor. "No, why should he, when it's his own sister's house? Gee up!" And he left us. It was sad to find the gentleman was not a higher life after all, but only mad. And I was more sorry than ever for poor Miss Sandal. As Oswald pointed out to the girls, they are much more blessed in their brothers than Miss Sandal is, and they ought to be more grateful than they are. And that's the end of that chapter, so I'm having a drink of water. Have you got yours? That's good. Yes. When you're doing lots and lots of reading, your mouth can get a little bit dry. So what have you been up to this week? Anything interesting? Anything exciting? Anything that the Bastable children would be jealous of? I hope you haven't been getting into too much trouble. Right, let's continue. This is chapter 10. Chapter 10. New Treasure Seekers by E. Nesbit, subtitled Or the Bastable Children in Search of a Fortune. And this is chapter 10, The Smuggler's Revenge. The days went on and Miss Sandal did not return. We went on being very sorry about Miss Sandal being so poor, and it was not our fault that when we tried to let the house in lodgings, the first lodger proved to be a lunatic of the deepest dye. Miss Sandal must have been a fairly decent sort because she seemed not to have written to father about it. At any rate, he didn't give it to us in any of our letters about our good intentions and their ending in a maniac. Oswald does not like giving up a thing just because it has once been muffed. The muffage of a plan is a thing that often happens at first to heroes like Bruce and the Spider and other great characters. Besides, grown-ups always say, if at first you don't succeed, try again, which apparently is attributed to Robert the Bruce and the Spider. That's what he learnt from the Spider. If this is the rule for Euclid, okay, maybe he's the one who originated it, but Bruce said it as well. If this is the rule for Euclid and the rule of 3 and all the things you would rather not do, think how much more it must be the rule when what you are after is your own idea and not just the rotten notion of that beast Euclid or the unknown but equally unnecessary author who composed the multiplication table. So we often talked about what we could do to make Miss Sandal rich. It gave us something to draw about when we happened to want to sit down for a bit in between all the glorious wet sandy games that happened by the sea. Of course, if we wanted real improving conversation, we used to go up to the boathouse and talk to the coast guards. I do think coast guards are A1. They are just the same as sailors, having been so in their youth, and you can get at them to talk to, which is not the case with sailors who are at sea or even in harbours, on ships. Even if you had the luck to get onto a man of war, you would very likely not be able to climb to the topgallants to talk to the man there, though in books the young hero always seems to be able to climb to the masthead the moment he is told to. It's actually not as easy as you think. Though in books the young hero always seems... Oh, I've read that bit. The coast guards told us tales of southern ports and of shipwrecks and officers they had not cottoned to and messmates that they had, but when we asked them about smuggling, they said there wasn't any to speak of nowadays. I expect they think they oughtn't to talk about such dark crimes before innocent kids like us, said Dickie afterwards, and he grinned as he said it. Yes, said Alice, they don't know how much we know about smugglers and bandits and highwaymen and burglars and coiners. And she sighed, and we all felt sad to think we had not any chance to play at being these things. Sorry. We might play smugglers, said Oswald, but he did not speak hopefully. Sorry, again. The worst of growing up is that you seem to want more and more to have a bit of the real thing in your games. Oswald could not now be content to play at bandits and just capture Albert next door, as once in happier days he was pleased and proud to do. It was not a coast guard that told us about the smugglers. It was a very old man we met 2 or 3 miles along the beach. What was the name of this chapter again? The Smuggler's Revenge. Okay, let's see where this goes. And I'm sure there's trouble of some sort, even if they don't mean to. They don't usually mean to, do they? It was not a coast guard that told us about the smugglers. It was a very old man that we met 2 or 3 miles along the beach. He was leaning against a boat that was the wrong way up on the shingle. That means that it was lying so at the bottom of the boat was up, which means if it's raining or anything like that, the water just runs off it instead of filling it up. It's often the way old boats are stored. Leaning against a boat that was the wrong way up on the shingle and smoking the strongest tobacco Oswald's young nose had ever met. I think it must have been Black Jack. We said, "How do you do?" and Alice said, "Do you mind if we sit down near you?" "Not me," replied the aged seafarer. We could see directly that he was this by his jersey and his sea boots. The girls sat down on the beach, but we boys leaned against the boat like the seafaring one. We hoped he would join in conversation, but at first he seemed too proud, and there was something dignified about him, bearded and like a Viking, that made it hard for us to begin. At last he took his pipe out of his mouth and said, "Here's a precious Quakers meeting. You didn't sit down here just for to look at me." "I'm sure you look very nice," Dora said. "Same to you, miss, I'm sure," was the polite reply. "We want to talk to you awfully," said Alice. "If you don't mind." "Talk away," said he, and then, as so often happens, no one could think of anything to say. Suddenly Noel said, "I think you look nice too, but I think you look as though you have a secret history. Have you?" "Not me," replied the Viking-looking stranger. "I ain't got no history, no geography neither. They didn't give us that much schooling when I was a lad." "Oh," replied Noel, "but what I really meant was, were you ever a pirate or anything?" "Never in all my born," replied the stranger, now thoroughly roused. "I'd scorn that haction. I was in the Navy, I was, till I lost the sight of my eye, looking too close at gunpowder. Pirates is snakes, they ought to be killed as such." We felt rather sorry, for though of course it is very wrong to be a pirate, it is very interesting too. Things are often like this. That is one of the reasons why it's so hard to be truly good. Dora was the only one who was pleased. She said, "Yes, pirates are very wrong, and so are highwaymen and smugglers." "I don't know about highwaymen," said the old man. "They went out afore my time, worse luck. But my father's great uncle by the mother's side, he see one hanged once, a fine upstanding fellow he was, and made a speech while they was a-fitting of the rope. All the women were snivelling and sniffing and throwing bouquets at him." "Did any of the bouquets reach him?" asked the interested Alice. "Not likely," said the old man. "Women can't never shy straight. I shouldn't wonder but what them posies heartened the chap up a bit, and afterwards they was all a-fighting to get a bit of the rope he was hung with, for luck." "Do tell us some more about him," said all of us but Dora. "I don't know no more about him. He was just hung, that's all. They was precious fond of hanging in them old faraway times." Did you ever know a smuggler?" asked H.O. "To speak to, I mean." "Ah, that's telling," said the old man, and he winked at us all. So then we instantly knew that the coast guards had been mistaken when they said there were no more smugglers now, and that this brave old man would not betray his comrades even to friendly strangers like us. But of course he could not know exactly how friendly we were, so we told him. Oswald said, "We love smugglers. We wouldn't even tell a word about it if you would only tell us." "There used to be lots of smuggling on these here coasts when my father was a boy," he said. "My own father's cousin, his father took to the smuggling, and he was a-doing so well at it that what does he do but he goes and gets married, and the preventives, they goes and nabs him on his wedding day and walks him straight off from the church door and claps him in Dover jail." "Oh, his poor wife," said Alice. "Whatever did she do?" "She didn't do nothing," said the old man. "It's a woman's place not to do nothing till she's told to. He'd done so well at the smuggling, he'd saved enough by his honest toil to take a little public. So she sits there a-waiting and attending to customers," public as in public bar, "tending to customers, for well she knowed him as he wasn't the chap to let a bit of jail stand in the way of his station in life. Well, it was 3 weeks to the day after the wedding. There comes a dusty chap to the Peal of Bells door." Peal of Bells must be the name of the pub. "That was the sign of over the public, you understand." Usual, I shouldn't have said it. I should have just read. We said we did, and breathlessly added, "Go on." "A dusty chap he was, got a beard and a patch over one eye, and he comes of an afternoon when there was no one about the place but her. 'Hello, missus,' says he, 'got a room for a quiet chap?' I don't take in no men folks, says she. Can't be bothered with him. You'll be bothered with me if I'm not mistaken, says he. Bothered if I will, says she. Bothered if you won't, says he. And with that he ups with his hand and off comes the black patch, and he pulls off the beard and gives her a kiss and a smack on the shoulder. She always said she nearly died when she see it was her new-made bridegroom under the beard. So she took her old man as a lodger, and he went to work up at Upton Farm with his beard on, and of nights he kept up the smuggling business, and for a year or more no one knowed as it was him, but they got him at last. What became of him? We all asked. He's dead, said the old man, but Lord love you, so everybody as lived in them far-off old ancient days all dead, preventives too, and smugglers and gentry all gone under the daisies. We felt quite sad. In other words, it's a long time ago they've all died. We felt quite sad. Oswald hastily asked if there wasn't any smuggling now. Not hereabouts, the old man answered, rather quickly for him. Don't you go for to think it. But I did know a young chap, quite young he is, with blue eyes, up Sunderland way it was. He'd got a goodish bit of baccy and stuff done up in an old shirt, and he was a-going off to the beach. A coastguard jumps out on it at him, and he says to himself, all you pee this time, says he. But out loud he says, hello, Jack, that you? I thought you was a tramp, says he. What you got in that bundle, says the coastguard. My washing, says he, and a couple of pairs of old boots. Then the coastguard, he says, shall I give you a lift with it? Thinking in himself the other chap wouldn't part with it if it was anything it oughtn't to be. But that young chap was so sharp. He says to himself, if I don't, he'll nail me, and if I do, well, there's just a chance. So he hands over the bundle, and the coastguard, he thinks it must be all right, and he carries it all the way up to his mother's for him, feeling sorry for the mean suspicions he'd had about the poor old chap. But that didn't happen near here. Oh, no. I think Dora was going to say old chap, but I thought he was young with blue eyes. But just at that minute, a coastguard came along and ordered us quite harshly not to lean on the boat. He was quite disagreeable about it. How different from our own coastguards. He was from a different station to theirs. The old man got off very slowly, and all the time he was arranging his long legs so as to stand on them. The coastguard went on being disagreeable as hard as he could in a loud voice. So here you go. Here's a picture. A coastguard ordered us. So there he is. The coastguard is that one in the dark outfit. And there's the old man the children are talking to. Yes, I will get the pictures up over on the Discord server, which you're welcome to join if you wish. When our old man had told the coastguard that no one had ever lost anything by keeping a civil tongue in his head, we all went away feeling very angry. Alice took the old man's hand as we went back to the village and asked him why the coastguard was so horrid. They gets notions in their heads, replied the old man. The most innocentest people they comes to think of things about. As all along of there being no smuggling in these here parts now. The coastguards ain't got nothing to do except think things about honest people. We parted from the old man very warmly, all shaking hands. He lives at a cottage not quite in the village and keeps pigs. We did not say goodbye till we had seen all the pigs. I dare say we should not have gone on disliking that disagreeable coastguard so much if he had not come along one day when we were talking to our own coastguards and asked why they allowed a pack of young shavers in the boathouse. We went away in silent dignity, but we did not forget. And when we were in bed that night, Oswald said, "Don't you think it would be a good thing if the coastguards had something to do?" Dickie yawned and said he didn't know. "I should like to be a smuggler," said Oswald. "Oh, yes, go to sleep if you like, but I've got an idea, and if you'd rather be out of it, I'll have Alice instead." "Fire away," said Dickie, now full of attention and leaning on his elbows. his elbow. Well then, said Oswald, I think we might be smugglers. We've played all those things so jolly often. But I don't mean play, said Oswald. I mean the real thing. Of course we should have to begin in quite a small way, but we should get on in time. And we might make quite a lot for poor Miss Sandal. Things that you smuggle are expensive, said Dicky. Well, we've got the chink the Indian uncle sent us on Saturday. I'm certain we could do it. We'd get someone to take us out at night in one of the fishing boats. Just tear across to France and buy a keg or a bale or something and rush back. Yes, and get nabbed and put in prison. Not me, said Dicky. Besides, who'd take us? That old Viking man would, said Oswald. But of course, if you funk it. I don't funk anything, said Dicky, bar making an ape of myself. Keep your hair on, Oswald. Look here. Suppose we get a keg with nothing in it, or just water. We could have all the fun, and if we were collared, we should have the laugh of that Coast Guard brute. Oswald agreed, but he made it a condition that we should call it the keg of brandy or whatever was in it, and Dicky consented. Smuggling is a manly sport, and girls are not fitted for it by nature. At least Dora is not, and if we had told Alice, she would have insisted on dressing as a boy and going too. And we knew Father would not like this, and we thought Noel and H.O. were too young to be smugglers with any hope of success. So Dicky and I kept the idea to ourselves. We went to see the Viking man the next day. It took us some time to make him understand what we wanted, but when he did understand, he slapped his leg many times and very hard, and declared that we were chips off the old block. But I can't go for to let you, he said. If you was nailed, it's the stone jug, bless your hearts. So then we explained about the keg really having only water in it, and he slapped his leg again, harder than ever, so that it would really have been painful to any but the hardened leg of an old sea dog. But the water made his refusals weaker, and at last he said, Well, see here, Benenden, him as owns the Mary Sarah, he's often took out a youngster or two for a night's fishing, when their pa's and ma's had no objection. You write your pa and ask if you mayn't go for a night's fishing, or you get Mr. Charteris to write. He knows it's all right, and you often done by visitors' kids, if boys, and if your pa says yes, I'll make it all right with Benenden. But mind, it's just a night's fishing. No need to name no kegs. That's just betwixt ourselves. So we did exactly as he said. Mr. Charteris is the clergyman. He was quite nice about it and wrote for us, and Father said yes, but be very careful and don't take the girls or the little ones. We showed the girls the letter, and that removed the trifling ill feeling that had grown up through Dick and me having so much secret talk about kegs and not telling the others what was up. Of course, we never breathed a word about kegs in public, and only to each other in bated breaths. What Father said about not taking the girls or the little ones, of course, settled any wild ideas Alice might have had of going as a cabin girl. The old Viking man, now completely interested in our scheme, laid all the plans in the deepest way you can think. He chose a very dark night. Fortunately, there was one just coming on. He chose the right time of the tide for starting, and just in the greyness of the evening when the sun is going down and the sea somehow looks wetter than at any other time, we put on our thick undershirts and then our thickest suits and football jerseys over everything, because we had been told it would be very cold. Then we said goodbye to our sisters and the little ones, and it was exactly like a picture of the Tar's farewell. It's obviously some famous picture that they know, possibly from a book, because we had bundles with things to eat tied up in blue checked handkerchiefs, and we said goodbye to them at the gate, and they would kiss us. Dora said, "Goodbye, I know you'll be drowned. I hope you'll enjoy yourselves, I'm sure." Alice said, "I do think it's perfectly beastly. You might just as well have asked for me to go with you, or you might have let us come and see you start." "Men must work and women must weep," replied Oswald with grim sadness. And the Viking said he wouldn't have have us at all unless we could get on board in a concealed manner, like stowaways. He said a lot of others would want to go too if they saw us. We made our way to the beach, and we tried to conceal ourselves as much as possible, but several people did see us. When we got to the boat, we found she was manned by our Viking and Benenden, and a boy with red hair, and they were running her down to the beach on rollers. Of course, Dickie and I lent a hand shoving at the stern of the boat when all the men said, "Yo-ho, heave-ho, my merry boys all." It wasn't exactly that they had said, but it meant the same thing, and we heaved like anything. It was a proud moment when her nose touched the water, and prouder still when only a small part of her stern remained on the beach, and Mr. Benenden remarked, "All aboard!" The red boy gave a leg up to Dickie and me and clambered up himself. Then the two men gave the last shoves to the boat, already cradled almost entirely on the bosom of the sea, and as the very end of the keel grated off the pebbles into the water, they leapt for the gunwale and hung on to it with their high sea boots waving in the evening air. By the time they had brought their legs on board and coiled a rope or two, we chanced to look back, and already the beach seemed quite a long way off. We were all really afloat. Our smuggling expedition was no longer a dream, but a realness. Oswald felt almost too excited at first to be able to enjoy himself. I hope you will understand this and not think the author is trying to express by roundabout means that the sea did not agree with Oswald. This is not the case. He was perfectly well the whole time. It was Dickie who was not, but he said it was the smell of the cabin and not the sea, and I'm sure he thought what he said was true. In fact, the cabin was a bit stiff altogether, and was almost the means of upsetting even Oswald. It was about 6 feet square, with bunks and an oil stove, and heaps of old coats and tarpaulins and sou'westers and things, and it smelt of tar and fish and paraffin smoke, and if you're a New Zealander that would mean kerosene, and machinery oil, and of rooms where no one ever opens the window. And I'm just going to add in here, from personal experience, that combination of smells is very, very likely to make someone feel seasick. I've experienced that one a lot of times. Oswald just put his nose in, and that was all. He had to go down later when some fish was cooked and eaten, but by that time he'd got what they call your sea legs. But Oswald felt more as if he had got a sea waistcoat, rather as if he'd got rid of a land waistcoat that was too heavy and too tight. I will not weary the reader by telling about how the nets are paid out and dragged in, or about the tumbling, shifting heaps of fish that come up, all alive, over the side of the boat, and it tips up with their weight till you think it's going over. It was a very good catch that night, and Oswald is glad he saw it, for it was very glorious. Dickie was asleep in the cabin at the time, and missed it. It was deemed best not to rouse him to fresh sufferings. It was getting latish, and Oswald, though thrilled in every marrow, was getting rather sleepy when old Benenden said, "There she is." Oswald could see nothing at first, but presently he saw a dark form on the smooth sea. It turned out to be another boat. She crept quietly up till she was alongside ours, and then a keg was hastily hoisted from her to us. A few words in low voices were exchanged. Oswald only heard, "Sure you ain't given us the wrong 'un?" And several people laughed hoarsely. On first going on board, Oswald and Dickie had mentioned kegs, and had to be ordered to stow that, so that Oswald had begun to fear that after all it was only a night's fishing, and that his glorious idea had been abandoned. But now he saw the keg, his trembling heart was reassured. It got colder and colder. Dickie, in the cabin, was covered with several coats richly scented with fish, and Oswald was glad to accept an oilskin and sou'wester, and to sit down on some spare nets. Until you are out on the sea at night, you can never have any idea how big the world really is. The sky looks higher up, and the stars look further off, and even if you know it is only the English Channel, yet it is just as good for feeling small on as the most trackless Atlantic or Pacific. Even the fish helped to show the largeness of the world, because you think of the deepness of the dark sea they come up out of in such rich profusion. The hold was full of fish after the second haul. Oswald sat leaning against the precious keg, and perhaps the bigness and quietness of everything had really rendered him unconscious, but he did not know he was asleep until the Viking man woke him up by kindly shaking him and saying, "'Ere, look alive, was ye thinking to beat her with that there precious keg of yours all above board and crying out to be broached?" So then Oswald roused himself, and the keg was rolled onto the fish where they lay, filling the hold, and armfuls of fish were thrown over it. "Is it really only water?" asked Oswald. "There's an awfully odd smell." And indeed, in spite of the many different smells that are natural to a fishing boat, Oswald began to notice a strong scent of railway refreshment rooms. "Of course it's only water," said the Viking. "What else would it likely be?" And Oswald thinks he winked in the dark. Perhaps Oswald fell asleep again after this. It was either that or deep thought. Anyway, he was aroused from it by a bump and a soft grating sound, and he thought at first the boat was being wrecked on a coral reef or something. But almost directly he knew that the boat had merely come ashore in the proper manner. So he jumped up. You cannot push a boat out of the water like you can push it in. It has to be hauled up by a capstan. If you don't know what that is, the author is unable to explain, but there is a picture of one. I haven't seen one yet in the book, but you can look one up online. Capstan, C-A-P-S-T-A-N. It's a device used for winding a rope around to pull things, and they used to use them a lot on ships and boats. When the boat was hauled up, we got out, and it was very odd to stretch your legs on land again. It felt shakier than being on sea. The red-haired boy went off to get a cart to take the shining fish to market, and Oswald decided to face the mixed-up smells of that cabin and wake Dickie. Dickie was not grateful to Oswald for his thoughtful kindness and letting him sleep through the perils of the deep and his own uncomfortableness. He said, "I do think you might have waked a chap. I've simply been out of everything." Oswald did not answer back. He is a proud and self-restraining nature. His is a proud and self-restraining nature. He just said, "Well, hurry up now and see them cart the fish away." So we hurried up, and as Oswald came out of the cabin, he heard strange voices, and his heart leapt up like the persons who behold a rainbow in the sky. For one of the voices was the voice of that inferior and unsailor-like coast guard from Long Beach, who had gone out of his way to be disagreeable to Oswald and his brothers and sisters on at least 2 occasions. And now Oswald felt almost sure that his disagreeableness, though not exactly curses, were coming home to roost, just as though they had been. "You're missing your beauty sleep, Stokes," we heard. "You're missing your beauty sleep, Stokes," we heard our Viking remark. "I'm not missing anything else, though," replied the coast guard. Like half a dozen mackerel for your breakfast?" inquired Mr. Benenden in kindly accents. "I've no stomach for fish, thank you all the same," replied Mr. Stokes coldly. He walked up and down the beach, clapping his arms to keep himself warm. "Going to see us unload her?" asked Mr. Benenden. "If it's all the same to you," answered the disagreeable coast guard. He had to wait a long time, for the cart did not come, and kept on not coming for ages. When it did, the men unloaded the boat, carrying the fish by basketfuls to the cart. Everyone played up jolly well. They took the fish from the side of the hold where the keg wasn't, till there was quite a deep hole there, and the other side where the keg really was looked like a mountain in comparison. This could be plainly seen by the detested coast guard and by 3 of his companions who had now joined him. It was beginning to be light, not daylight, but a sort of ghost light that you could hardly believe was the beginning of sunshine, and the sky being blue again instead of black. The hated coast guard got impatient. He said, "You'd best own up. It'll be better for you. It's bound to come out along of the fish. I know it's there. We've had private information up at the station. The game's up this time, so don't you make no mistake." Mr. Benenden and the Viking and the boy looked at each other. "And what might your precious private information have been about?" asked Mr. Benenden. "Brandy," replied the coastguard Stokes, and he went and got onto the gunwale. "And what's more, I can smell it from here." Oswald and Dickie drew near, and the refreshment room smell was stronger than ever, and a brown corner of the keg was peeping out. "There you are," cried the loathed one. "Let's have that gentleman out, if you please, and then you'll all just come along of me." Remarking with a shrug of the shoulders that he supposed it was all up, our Viking scattered the fish that hid the barrel and hoisted it from its scaly bed. "That's about the size of it," said the coastguard we did not like. "Where's the rest?" "That's all," said Mr. Benenden. "We're poor men, and we had to act according to our means." "We'll see the boat clear to her last timber, if you've no objections," said the detestable one. I could see that our gallant crew were prepared to go through with the business. More and more of the coastguards were collecting, and I understood that what the crew wanted was to go up to the coastguard station with that keg of pretending brandy and involve the whole of the coastguards of Long Beach in one complete and perfect cell. But Dickie was sick of the entire business. He really has not the proper soul for adventures, and what soul he had been damped by what he had gone through. So he said, "Look here, there's nothing in that keg but water." Oswald could have kicked him, though he is his brother. "Huh," replied the unloved one. "D'ye think I haven't got a nose? Why, it's oozing out of the bunghole now, strong as Samson." "Open it and see," said Dickie, disregarding Oswald's whispered instructions to him to shut up. "It is water." "What do you suppose I suppose you want to get water from the other side for, young duffer?" replied the brutal official. "There's plenty of water on this side." It's French water," replied Dickie madly. "It's ours, my brother's and mine. We asked these sailors to get it for us." "Sailors indeed," said the hateful coastguard. "You come along with me." And our Viking said he was something or other. But Benenden whispered to him in a low voice that it was all right. Time was up. No one heard this but me and the Viking. "I want to go home," said Dickie. "I don't want to come along with you." "What did you want water for?" was asked. "To try it?" "To stand you a drink next time you ordered us off your beastly boat," said Dickie, and Oswald rejoiced to hear the roar of laughter that responded to this fortunate piece of cheek. I suppose Dickie's face was so angel-like, innocent-looking, like stowaways in books, that they had to believe him. Oswald told him so afterwards, and Dickie hit out. Anyway, the keg was broached, and sure enough, it was water, and sea water at that, as the unamiable one said when he had tasted it out of a tin cup, for nothing else would convince him. "But I smell brandy still," he said, wiping his mouth after the sea water. Our Viking slowly drew a good-sized, flat-labelled bottle out of the front of his jersey. "From the old ship," he said gently. "I may have spilt a drop or two here or there over my keg, my hand not being very steady, as is well known, owing to spells of marsh fever as comes over me every 6 weeks to the day." Marsh fever, malaria, recurrent malaria. The coastguard that we never could bear said, "Marsh fever be something or othered," and his comrades said the same, but they all blamed him, and we were glad. We went home sleepy but rejoicing. The whole thing was as complete a sell as ever I wished to see. And here you go, here's a picture. Sure enough, it was sea water, as the unamiable one said when he had tasted it. There they are, there's the barrel. There's the unamiable one over here, wiping his mouth after having taken a mouthful of not brandy, but sea water. Yuck. Of course, we told our own dear and respected Lymchurch coastguards, and I think they may be trusted not to let it down on the good Long Beach coastguards for many a good day. If their memories get bad, I think there will always be plenty of people along the coast to remind them, so that's all right. When we had told the girls all and borne their reproaches for not telling them before, we decided to give the Viking 5 bob for the gameway he had played up. So we did. He would not take it at first, but when we said, "Do, you might buy a pig with it and call it Stokes after that coastguard," he could no longer resist and accepted our friendly gift. We talked with him for a bit, and when we were going, we thanked him for being so jolly and helping us to plant out the repulsive coastguard so thoroughly. Then he said, "Don't mention it. Did you tell your little girls what you was up to?" "No," said Oswald, "not till afterwards." "Then you can hold your tongues. Well, since you've acted so handsome about that there pig, what's to be named Stokes, I don't mind if I tells you something, only mum's the word." We said we were quite sure it was. "Well then," said he, leaning over the pigsty wall and rubbing the spotted pig's back with his stick, "it's an ill wind that blows no good to nobody. You see, that night there was a little bird went and whispered to them up at Long Beach about our little bit of a keg, so that when we landed they were there." "Of course," said Oswald. "Well, if they was there, they couldn't be somewheres else, could they?" We owned they could not. "I shouldn't wonder," he went on, "but what a bit of cargo was run up that night further up the beach. Something as wasn't sea water. I don't say it was so, mind, and mind you don't go for to say it." Then we understood that there is a little smuggling done still, and that we had helped in it, though quite without knowing. We were jolly glad afterwards when we had had that talk with father, when he told us that the laws are made by the English people, and it is dishonourable for an Englishman not to stick to them. We saw that smuggling must be wrong. But we have never been able to feel really sorry. I do not know why this is. So they didn't quite get into trouble, but they almost did. But they did do something a bit naughty. Helping with an idea for smuggling. Oh my goodness. And that's the end of the chapter, and that's the end of today's reading too. So we'll see you next time. Don't forget, follow me on Twitch or subscribe on YouTube and you'll be notified next time I'm reading. Bye.